Good morning, everyone, and thank you again for taking the time to join us. Our topic today is building your 2023 calendar. I'm Samantha. I'm the Director of Education with ClubExpress. So as I mentioned, all of your microphones and your phones are muted. So if you do have questions, go ahead and enter them into the chat window. Devin will get you an answer. If there are questions that are really beneficial for the group, we'll go through those at the very end when we have sort of a live Q&A where we wrap up some of the questions that we saw in the chat, and we make sure all of those get answered before we wrap up for today. A recording of this webinar and all of our other webinars are available on our YouTube channel. So if you can't make it for the if you can't stay for the entire webinar, you can't make it to our future webinars, you can go ahead and check out that recording on our YouTube channel. If you're interested in what other webinars we have coming up, you can head to our calendar at clubexpress.com/calendar, and we have a list of all of our monthly webinars available there for you to register for in advance. Now, you don't have to register for these in advance, but it gives you an opportunity to include questions or topics that you want to see demonstrated live in that particular session. So if you are taking a look at our calendar and you see something coming up that you've always had a question about or always wanted to know how you do something very specific, go ahead and submit that as a suggestion to us. And we can roll that right into our webinar topic for that day. So as I mentioned, this recording of this webinar and our other webinars, as well as our video tutorials, are available on our YouTube channel. So when you're on our YouTube channel, either already watching one of our fabulous videos, or if you just happen to be browsing around, search for clubexpress.com. That's .com spelled out, and then go ahead and hit that subscribe button. It isn't so we get more followers, it's so you get notified every time we post a new video or tutorial, and you are never left out of the loop. And without further ado, we're going to jump right into our topic. Now, you may have noticed that the last few weeks of webinars that we have hosted over the last couple of months have been focused on events. So this one is no different. This particular webinar is going to go through all of the tips and tricks that you need to set yourself up for fabulous activities throughout the year. We're going to go through how to set up some of the defaults that you may not be familiar with that can help you save yourself some time throughout the year, and also familiarize you with those default settings with all of the events that you're going to be creating so that your year is as streamlined as possible. Now, your event calendar helps you categorize events, create copies of events. You can delete events from your calendar, ask your registrants questions. You can pair attachments with each type of event category. We've gone through a lot of this in our previous webinars. So now we want to kind of take some of the things that we've learned in our past webinars and we want to apply them to your calendar moving forward. Now, most organizations are going to be preparing their calendar in January for the entire year. So this is really your chance to sit down and focus on how you're setting these events up, setting them up the right way so that you can set yourself up for success. So in today's webinar, what are we going to cover? We're going to cover a lot of different types of events, and we're going to call out the very specific things that you want to make sure that you're applying to those types of events to make sure that they behave properly for you, to make sure that you're collecting the information that you need, and to make sure that your members have a really easy way to access the events that they want to see the most. So we're going to talk about board and committee meetings, coordinated and community events. So events that you may not be hosting yourselves, but that you are hosting maybe in conjunction with another organization, workouts, classes, any types of events where they're happening on a repeating basis. We'll talk about save the dates, how to include Zoom registration within events that you might be offering registration for on your ClubExpress website. And we're going to talk about some of the defaults that you want to configure ahead of time and understanding how those defaults are going to affect your events so that, again, we can set ourselves up for success right at the start of the year. So our first stop for today is going to be reviewing board and committee meetings. And for that, I'm just going to switch gears here. When I am talking about our event calendar, I'm really going to be spending all of my time within the events. So I'm going to navigate to my control panel. I'm in the website tab and I'll select events. Now, some of these events have been created previously. So I'm going to talk about some of the settings that I have highlighted here, and then I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the ways that we've set that up. Now, the first thing that I want to do is go ahead and search through my calendar and take a look at some of the events that I have going on already. So at the very top, we can see that all of these events are going to start with the event that's furthest into the future, and they're going to go back in time. So I have events that have been set up for me for the entire year so far. And this is what your calendar could look like if you have a lot of activity. If you don't have very much activity, you may only see a page or so of events. Now, I can see that there are also a lot of events here that repeat. It looks like we have committee meeting after committee meeting. Now, if we take a look at our calendar from the front end, it looks a little bit less busy. We do see that we have a pretty busy calendar here. Now, what I want to do is focus on a couple of the committee meetings that we have on our calendar today. So with committee meetings, we are really looking for a repeating type of event because most of your committee meetings are going to be the same. When you're creating an event template that you intend to use over and over again, you're going to want to make sure that it's something that you can use on a repeated basis. You want to make sure that you're not adding in anything that's going to be really specific to that event. You can, of course, change it, but it really allows you to create that copy and add it to your calendar multiple times without having to really make a lot of changes or waste a lot of time working through those items. So for the first event that we're going to take a look at, we're going to look at our safety committee meeting. We can see that safety committee meeting in bright green right on our calendar. You'll notice that it's bright green, and a lot of the other events are in separate colors as well. So that is our categorization. When you're working with event categories, you want to make sure that you do give your members a chance to quickly glance at your calendar and see all of the different types of events that you're hosting. And remember that these categories don't just stand out with their colors. You can also search and filter your calendar by your event category. Open versus closed meetings. So when we talk about open and closed, you're thinking about registration. You're thinking about visibility of those details. So really thinking about how this event is supposed to look for your members, who's supposed to see it and who's not supposed to see it. Those are really important things to think about right off the top. And when you're looking at board and committee meetings, tracking attendance. So when we are going through our year, a lot of organizations require attendance at a specific number of meetings. Members perhaps can't renew if they haven't attended 10 out of the 12 monthly meetings. So if you are interested in tracking attendance, make sure that you turn that on when you are creating your event. And then don't forget to use blast emailing within the event to send out your agenda to your committee members. And then you're also able to send your meeting minutes to your attendees. So let's go ahead and we'll go back into our demo site and we'll take a look at some of these events that we have set up. So we'll go ahead and we'll go into the back end of our calendar. And if we scroll down, what we're going to do is we are going to only show events in the specific category that I'm looking for. And you can see that this is really helpful, not at this point that we have had several events. We have 42 pages of events. Many of them are in the past, but what we want to do is we want to look for the category that we have designated all of these meetings as. And let me go ahead and find my members only category. We'll go ahead and search for this. So with our members only category, we have a handful of different meetings that we've created. We have some all member meetings, and within several other categories, we have some free events that we've added to our calendar as well. We have different social events that we've added. So as we're going through, we can see that all of these events have been added and categorized, and we can see the category that's been applied when we view it in this particular, when we view it in our search results and when we're looking at it on the calendar itself. So we'll go ahead And we'll go back into the calendar and I'll go ahead and find that safety committee, or excuse me, the events committee meeting. So with this particular committee meeting, I'm going to go in and I'm going to view some of the things that I've set up for this meeting so far. And I'm going to go ahead and show my administrative options. And I'm going to go back into this event and take a look at some of the options that I have set up. Now, with my basic information, this is where I'm going to categorize this particular meeting. And I have my category set up as committee meetings. So right away, I've categorized this. I'm good to go from the start. Now, with open versus closed meetings, we have two options. We want to think about both registration and visibility, because there are two different things. The first thing that we would think about would be visibility. So just because an event is visible to members, to administrators, to non-members, it doesn't mean that they're able to register for that event. They may only see the event appear on their calendar. And we'll show you what that looks like later today with another type of event. With each of those events, I'm going to include my contacts, my location. All of this information is relatively basic, but what I want to focus on would be our registration and fees. I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of these changes. And I want to point out some of the other items that I've focused on. With registration and fees, I'll go ahead and edit this option. At the very top, I do have registration set to required. And this is because I am planning on taking attendance for this particular meeting. And if I don't require registration, I'm not going to have an accurate list for attendance. I'm not going to be able to take attendance fully. So if I'm requiring registration, I have a full list of attendees and I've elected to take attendance. So by selecting yes, you'll see at the very top that I have an attendance button waiting for me. Not every one of your events is going to have an attendance button. That is a button that only appears if you have opted to take attendance for that event. So you might wonder, why wouldn't I just opt to take attendance for all of my events? Well, it's just another option that you have to select. It's another button that you have hanging out in your button tray that you may not necessarily need. And we do want to focus not just on setting ourselves up for success, but also simplifying options that we don't necessarily need to visit every time. So once we've decided that we can track attendance, we'll get that option right at the top and we don't have to worry about that any further. Now, with tracking attendance, we've talked about this in previous webinars. So if you pop into our YouTube channel and search for events, you'll see some of our most recent webinars. And one of them actually covers how to manage active events. So that covers taking attendance. It'll cover really anything, managing registrations, anything that might be included in managing an active event, an event that is currently going on, or you're ramping up to the event date. Now, I'm going to switch gears here just for a moment. And I want to talk about community and coordinated events. So with a community event, you may not necessarily be the organization that is hosting that particular event. That's going to be something that is hosted by an organization. Maybe you work in conjunction with, maybe they're entirely in a different maybe they're in a different state or just a local town near you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how you can get that on your calendar so that your members still know that that kind of thing is happening. And what we have set up, we can see here, is a save the date or a calendar ad for the 2023 Pause Furball. Pause is a local Chicago charity. They help they're an animal shelter, essentially, and every year they have what they call the Fur Ball. So we've added this to our calendar as a single activity event. Now, when I take a look at this event from an administrative perspective, I'll go ahead and select that edit icon. It's going to look like a regular event that I would have added to my calendar. But the difference is that registration is not actually happening on your own site. Registration is happening with the animal shelter or with your local library or with another organization that you work closely with. So at the top, we have our basic information. We have a formatted description. We've inserted a little bit of information so that members know what it is that we are sort of advertising on our site. Well, when I go into registration and fees, and I take a look at this panel, which gives me just a very brief snapshot of how I have set up some of these events, I'll go ahead and select my registration and fees. I can see that my registration actually has a URL with it. So if you have an event that you want to post to your calendar, but that you're not actually managing registration for, or registration for that event is being managed elsewhere, you'll want to go ahead and select external as your registration option. So what that means is that you're going to get an option to put in a URL for where registration is taking place. And you can have that be your registration button, essentially. So I have entered in the Pause Chicago website as my external registration option. Now, I'm going to go back into my event by clicking this Back to Event button and see what that looks like for members visiting that particular event on my calendar. That Back to Event button is going to take you to kind of a member's view of the event. You'll see that there are a couple of different details. So on the right-hand side, we do have that Admin Options button. That button won't appear for regular members. So your regular members are going to see very basic information, and they're going to see a register button and the option to add it to their calendar. If I click register now, it's actually going to take me to the Pause Chicago website. It's not going to continue to allow me to register on the ClubExpress website. So a couple things to keep in mind when you are looking at community events like this. As I mentioned, that registration is not happening on the ClubExpress website. Your registrations won't be tracked in ClubExpress for events where registration is happening on an external site. So yes, the member or the non-member might be going to your website and clicking on the Register Now button, but just because they click on the button doesn't necessarily mean that they have registered for that event. So there really isn't a great way for you to be able to track those registrations. So if tracking those registrations is important, you can certainly add in registration on your own site and include a link to register actually on the community site. However, at that point, you're asking your users to register for the same event twice, and we'll talk about how you can avoid that in a later section when we talk about Zoom registration as well. So keep in mind, we're not just looking to make things easier for us as administrators, we also want them to be as easy as possible for our members. So keep that registration to a minimum. Now, the next type of event that we want to talk about would be our workouts and classes. So we've talked about repeating events. We've talked about making copies of events in a lot of our other event webinars. And I want to kind of drill that home just a little bit more today. So I am going to go ahead and share this one more time. So with our workouts and classes, we're going to be talking about repeating dates and copies of events. And these are things that get confused quite often. So I wanted to just sort of highlight again the differences between the two and when you might use one over the other. So with a repeating date event, the dates are all connected. So when a user reaches your calendar and they register for one of those items, they are essentially registering for all occurrences of that event. And underneath that, you can see some examples of repeating date events would be an 8-week course where you expect your students or your members to show up for all 8 weeks, or a mandatory meeting. We talked about your committee meetings being potentially mandatory. We talked about those committee meetings, requiring attendance in order for you to maybe renew your membership. So keeping that in mind, perhaps you do want people to register for all of those meetings in advance so that you know when they're going to be appearing. Now, copies, on the other hand, those events are not connected. When you make one event and you make a copy of it, initially, those items are going to look the same. However, those events are actually not connected at all. So when a user registers for the first event that you created, they won't automatically be registered for any additional copies. And then we have some examples of copies right underneath that. So your monthly or quarterly meetings, weekend or weekly rides that you might have with your cycling club, drop-in workouts with recommended or required registration, where you want people to register for each individual drop-in workout that you're hosting as a club, so that you know whether or not to staff someone or to get a volunteer to host that type of thing. If, on the other hand, you just always have someone hanging out at your clubhouse ready to work out at a moment's notice, you might just use the repeating date option. You may not even require registration for that. A repeating date event is also really great to throw on your calendar to just let members know this particular event is happening on a weekly or a monthly basis. You can come, you don't have to register if you happen to be a club that's a little more relaxed with your event process. Let's take a look at two different types of workout or class events that we've created. One, which is a repeating date event, and one which we've created as a copy. So back on our site, I'm going to go back into the control panel, or I'll go back into the control panel and into our event calendar. And the first event that we want to talk about would be our advanced burner class. So we have our advanced burner class right here on February 1st. And I'll go ahead and select my edit option to see how I would have configured that class. So on the left-hand side, we see some familiar tabs, but we also see our repeating date tab. So the repeating date tab only appears when you configure an event to be a repeating date event. Now, if I select my basic information, I can see where I configured that option right from the start. So at the very top, right underneath some of my basic information, I can see that the event repeats on multiple or non-consecutive days. That lets the system know that I am going to need to configure repeating dates at some point. So I'll go ahead and cancel out of this, and I will select those repeating dates. And we can see that we have just 4 weeks of this class. And when someone goes to register for this particular advanced burner class, they are going to see the option, or they're going to see all of the individual dates, but they won't have an option to register for individual dates. And if I go back into the event, I can see my burner class, I can see basic information, and if I select my down arrow, I can see all of the repeating dates that have been included with this particular event. And if I register for this event, it will register me for every single instance, and I'll appear with all of those registrants. So this would be used, again, if you expect everyone to be attending the burner class and attending every single class. So if this is something that you're offering a certificate for or some kind of accreditation, these are events that you would want registration to be tied together for. Now, on the other hand, we do have events where we have just created a copy of the event. If we go back into our calendar, we have a weekend casual workout. Now, our weekend casual workout is one of those sort of drop-in events that we were talking about before. And each one of these has been repeated every Saturday or every other Saturday. If we go back into our calendar, we can see that it looks like they're repeating every other Saturday. And if I select it, I can go ahead and register. Even on the left-hand side here, I can see that registration is recommended. I haven't required registration for this. I don't necessarily need it. Now, if you aren't requiring registration, odds are that you may just not get people to register at all, and you might get a handful of people to show up. But just make sure that you're choosing the right R for your registration, and you want required instead of recommended. Now, when I take a look at these admin options, I'm not seeing anything highly unusual. I'm seeing my basic information, my event contact, and my location. And when I go back into my events manager, I'm going to go back into my event calendar, select this edit option that takes me right to the back end of my events manager. So if you spend a lot of time looking at your calendar, you can get there very easily. You don't have to visit the control panel every single time. And when I'm looking at the back end here, I can already tell a difference between the copies and between the repeating date event. My advanced burner class has 4 separate instances, but I'm only seeing it on my back end one time. So again, just because I have 4 separate events that are included in this, it's only going to appear once because it is technically one event with 4 occurrences. Now, on the other hand, my weekend casual workouts, you can see that those have repeated weekly. So essentially what I did was I created one weekend casual workout. And then I went over into my maintain column and selected my trusty clipboard icon. That clipboard icon is going to be your friend. That clipboard icon isn't just in the event calendar. You're going to see that icon in a lot of different spaces across your website. That's our copy icon. So the clipboard is sort of a standard copy icon across the board. You can use that to copy all kinds of things across your website and save yourselves a ton of time. Something to keep in mind, actually, a few things to keep in mind. With events, when you are making a copy, everything that is included in the event that you are copying is copied to the new event. Registrations are not copied. So if you happen to create the workout and someone registered within the first 5 seconds, fabulous. Don't worry, their registration won't be copied over. What you should be aware that gets copied over, any typos. So first things first, if you are setting up your event calendar this year, might we strongly recommend that if there is an event that you are intending to copy more than, let's say, 3 or 4 times, you definitely want to make sure that you don't have typos, or just save yourselves the trouble and only make a handful of copies at a time. Because that typo or that weird photo that you want to replace in all of the future meetings got copied over, you're going to have to go into each individual copy and fix that. I have made this mistake several times. Plenty of people have made this mistake several times. And it's not like it's not going to happen again in the future, but we want to give that very nice little warning so you can kind of have that in the back of your head as you're going through. Yes, the copy feature is fabulous and it's a great way to save yourself time, but it also can end up causing you to waste a little bit more time if you aren't careful. So I've gone through my weekend casual workout. I've checked it for typos. Maybe I fixed a couple of things that I didn't really like, and I was glad that I went back and looked at it. I can make one single copy and be done. I can make multiple copies. Now, our copy feature is pretty neat, actually. You can create a really specific schedule for this repetition. I can repeat monthly on a specific, weekly on a specific date, monthly on a specific day of the month, or let's say, the 3rd Thursday of every 3 months. So we can get really, really specific with how often we want these to repeat. What I ended up doing was I just wanted every 2 weeks starting on Saturday. And then I ended it after a handful of occurrences. You can see that my weekend workouts don't go too far into the future. And then once you save it, the system will actually mass create all of the individual events for you. So we can see that I created my weekend casual workouts and I had them repeat all the way into June. So I added about 6 months worth of weekend workouts here. Now, if you're thinking that you might want to add all of those events into your future, but maybe you don't want people registering for a workout class that you have in October, 8 months in advance. So when we are talking about visibility, and this goes back to visibility versus registration and what those differences might be, let's go into our weekend casual workout for June 24th. I'm going to go ahead and edit those options. And I'll select the edit icon with my basic information. Now, right at the top here, we can see our visibility options. Now, we can make these details visible to everyone, which we do want them to be visible to everyone. But right next to that is our date visible. Now, the date visible is going to control when that event appears on your calendar. So maybe you want to throw an entire year's worth of events on your calendar, but you don't want events for November and December actually showing up. Maybe you haven't nailed down some of the dates or some of the details. You want it on your calendar for your sake and for the sake of the other administrators in your organization, but you don't want to deal with the hassle of people registering for an event that might have a time change or a venue change, or maybe you haven't quite figured out how much you're selling tickets to your annual gala for just yet. So This visibility option is going to be really useful, especially, like I said, if you're planning out a year's worth of events at the beginning of the year. So you can go ahead and select that date visibility option. It's just your standard calendar, and you can choose the date in the future that you would like the event to appear on your calendar. If you don't select a date, the item goes onto your calendar immediately. Now, speaking of maybe adding things to your calendar that you aren't quite ready to have folks register for just yet. And we're sort of talking about save the dates. And before we talk about save the dates, one of my favorite ways to do a save the date would be a quick event. So what I want to do is just go ahead and maybe switch a couple of gears here and talk about quick events. So are quick events right for you? There are very big differences between a quick event and a full event. Now, quick events are events that don't hold any fees. They don't have a formatted description. They won't have questions, and you won't be able to mark attendance. So right off the bat, if your event carries a fee with it, quick events are not for you. If you need to have a formatted description as part of the event, as opposed to just a short description, because you do have a short description included in those, you won't be able to use a quick event. There's only one event contact associated with a quick event, but it does include an RSVP option. So let's take a look at one of the ways that we have used a quick event with our demo club. And for that, I'll go right back into my event calendar. I'll select that edit icon. And at the very top, if I don't want to scroll through my full list of events here, I can choose my event type, deselect all of them, and select just quick events. And we're going to find our quick event. We're going to take a look at how we set this up and the settings that we chose. Now, I have a handful of different quick events that I've used. I'm going to select my save the date for our club's Valentine's Day party. And I'll go ahead and select this option. And on the right-hand side, we can see our quick event tools. Now, normally we would have a sort of admin toolbox or an admin option over here in our toolbox at the top. So this is a quick event. It's slightly different. When I select this edit icon, I am taken to the quick event screen. Now, we've been looking at full events so far in our entire session. This quick event is really just the one page. So if you aren't familiar with quick events just yet, make sure that there's something that is going to work for you and the event that you're creating, and then give them a shot. Now, right at the top, we can see that we have our short description. Like I said, there is not a formatted description that's associated with quick events, but many of the other options are still there. I can still adjust my visibility. I can still display contact information for my event contact. I have my event time as well, and you'll see that I do only have one event contact available. I can't add more. Underneath that, we do have the same registration options with the addition of an RSVP only option. So a lot of organizations do mention that their members would maybe prefer a shorter registration process. So if you have events on your calendar, especially where you are not including a fee with that event, think about whether you really need to use some of those other options, and if a quick event can be used instead of a full event, especially since you do have an RSVP option built into the full event, where you'd have to go through the registration process, which is a minimum of 3 separate clicks that you might be including. With an RSVP option, I'm just selecting my response. Your RSVP scope is really your registrant list. So with all of our registration types within a quick event, whether it's registrations required, registrations recommended, you'll notice that we have fewer options. Now, with your regular events or full events, as we say, your registration can be limited to a specific subgroup or to a specific member type or an interest group. With quick events, you are only able to say, I want everyone to be able to register or just my active members. So right here, we have just active members that are registering for this. And this is actually not a regular event. This is just to save the date. We just want to save the date on our calendar because what we're inviting people to do, and we'll go right back into the save the date party. What I want people to do is just RSVP themselves so I can kind of get a head count. And then once that's over, I'm going to maybe send out an email to everyone who was added to the save the date to let them know that the event is posted or that tickets are on sale. So this gives me a chance to see this on my calendar as an administrator. It gives members a chance to see that event way into the future. Of course, Valentine's Day is just around the corner. So that's not quite that into the future. But if you have an event 10 months from now and you want people to be aware of it, you can go ahead and add that to your calendar. And then, of course, you'd be able to communicate to those members to let them know, this event's been added to the calendar. They can go ahead and sign up for it for real this time. And you'll see that on the right-hand side, we have our RSVP options. So I can RSVP yes for this event, and I'm done. And there's my response. So instead of your member having to go through the entire registration process for something really simple, they can just go ahead and RSVP to something. So a couple of other things that I want to talk about, and the next is going to be, we'll go right back into our events manager. I want to talk a little bit more about visibility. And I mentioned this at the very top of our session today when we talked about our committee meetings and whether or not those were open versus closed meetings. And we saw a little bit about visibility when we were taking a look at our save the date. So visibility controls who can see details, not just who can see them, but when they can see them. That visibility date comes into play too occasionally. So I'm looking at these two events that have a longer title that's a little bit difficult to see, but we have two events called All Member Meeting, and I'll go ahead and visit my calendar and view my events that way. That way I can kind of see a little bit of a better idea here. So we have an all-member meeting where the details are for everyone, and an all-member meeting where the details are for members only. And what I want to do very quickly is I want to log out and view this as a member who is not logged in just yet. And when I'm doing that, I want you to sort of put yourself in your members' shoes. A lot of organizations also say that they have trouble with members who maybe forget to log in or don't want to log in or aren't used to logging in, and they're not able to visit their calendar and sign up for events, or they're signing up for events as a non-member. So this is potentially a way to sort of stave that off, a way to force your members to sign in, but to still let them know that these events are happening. So instead of making your events maybe only visible at all to logged in members, maybe you want the event to be visible, but you want to hide the details. Give them a little bit of a taste of the event, but give them a reason to have to sign in. So when I visit my calendar again, if we look at the upper right-hand corner, I'm no longer signed in as Martin Smith. I'll go ahead and click that calendar option. And let's start off with the all-member meeting details for everyone. So this is something where I have not set up some additional visibility settings. I'm seeing the link to the event. So we just added a YouTube link instead of a Zoom link. We have our meeting ID and passcode. This is going to be a virtual event. It is RSVP only, but you'll see that I don't have that option here. I can only add this to my calendar, which doesn't necessarily help me, but I do have access to all of these details. Now, if I go back to the event calendar, and again, I'm still not signed in, and I select my all-member meeting where I've hidden the details, now I'm asked to sign in. So I can go ahead and I can sign in, and we'll take a look at the event calendar and see how I've set this up. So I'm taken to my details for members only meeting. So this is the meeting that I set up where I'm only reserving those details for a logged in member. And now I can see the details. I can actually navigate to the event itself, and I can RSVP right away. And if I take a look at how I've set that up, and again, this is something that's available not just in a quick event, but this is available in a full event as well. This is our visibility setting. So these are visible to everyone, details for members only, or visible to members only. This means that the event won't even appear on your calendar unless you are signed in as a member. So moving on to past quick events. So we've talked about using quick events as a way to make registration easier for your members. And then we sort of talked about ways to use visibility, not just in quick events, but in full events as well, to help remind your members to sign in and register for those events. Now, some other event tips that we talked about. So we talked about visibility and registration. And again, registration is what's going to limit who can actually sign up for that event. So that's going to allow or prevent registration based on things like your member type, your subgroup, any interest group that you might belong to, and a handful of other registration options. And we've gone through those registration options in a couple of other very recent webinars. So what we want to move on to now are our last few event tips for the day. So one of the things that folks are doing a lot now is using Zoom's registration option as opposed to any other calendar that they might be using. Zoom has a lot of great reporting and they have a lot of features that are built into their platform. So that's completely fine. We don't have any hard feelings against Zoom, but something to think about when you are setting that up. If you do intend for your attendees to register on Zoom, put in their details on Zoom, their name and their email and their address, and perhaps maybe answer a question or two, you want to keep that in mind that your members are going to be going through a registration process already within their Zoom registration. So what you don't want to do is have them register essentially twice for the same meeting. So I'm going to go into my control panel and select my event calendar. And I'll go ahead and search here. Now, when we're going through all of our meetings, I have my virtual meeting with Zoom registration ready to go. And I added this as a quick event. You don't have to add this as a quick event at all. You can add this as a full event. You can add it as anything that you'd like. Now, when I select register, that's actually going to take me to my Zoom link. It's going to take me to the Zoom registration page. And that's because we went ahead and selected the registration option as external. And if I select my edit icon and I scroll down here, our registration is actually set to external. What you don't want to do, and it's hard to kind of get out of this, just because it is a Zoom link, that doesn't mean that that's what you want to put in your virtual location information. So you definitely only want to put that in your registration option. If you were to put your Zoom registration link into your virtual information, what's going to happen is your members are going to go ahead and register on your ClubExpress website. Then they're going to get an email that includes the link to their session. Now, if they have read all of the details, perhaps you wrote in there that you want people to register on Zoom. Hopefully they read it and they can register in advance. If not, it's going to be 5 minutes before the Zoom meeting starts, and they're going to click that link thinking it's going to take them right into the meeting, and they're going to be asked to register again. And it'll cause a lot of confusion. They might wonder why they had to register twice for a meeting. So little tip is just make sure that you are putting that Zoom registration or any other registration link in the proper spot. You want to put that in your external registration spot. You don't want to put any registration links in your location information. And notice that all I put in my location information was register on Zoom. I just wanted to put it out there, and I can certainly put that in the short description as well. You'll register on Zoom for this meeting. And then very quickly, we want to go through a couple of extra default options that we want to point out as ways to set yourself up in the beginning of the year. And we're just going to highlight a handful of the important ones. So at the very top right-hand corner, I'm going to select my configure option and select event defaults.
Now, I'm going to scroll past a lot of this. We do touch on some of our other default options in our recent event-based webinars. So we really try to focus on the things of importance for the day. So there's a lot to cover, which is why we break up a lot of the module into multiple webinars. So we highly encourage you to watch all of them so you can pick up a lot of the things that we've skipped over in this and other webinars. So when I'm going through my event options, the first thing that I want to focus on today would be our default event contact. So your default event contact is going to populate every single time you create an event, whether it's a quick event or a full event. That event contact can have some very basic information shown about them. And it doesn't have to be the contact that you use for every event. The way that you should be thinking about your default options is 7 to 9 out of 10 times. If you are using that, you should set it as a default. Even if it's not being used every time, you can still change it every time you create an event. So if I add one person as my contact person here, we'll go ahead and select and search for one of our members, and we'll add Audrey. Now, every time I create an event, Audrey is going to be listed as a contact. If Audrey isn't a contact for that event, I can certainly remove her on an event by event basis, but it is saving me quite a bit of time. And then our next option that we want to focus on would be our waitlist options. So with our waitlist options, every single time you configure a waitlist, you're going to be prompted to choose when those particular members can sign up for the event, how many or how the waitlist is processed, how our capacity is affected. And all of this is in our registration section, which is exactly where you would configure the waitlist in the event itself within registration and fees. So under our waitlist hours and how to process the waitlist, our number of hours is something that you can configure as a default or on an event by event basis. So here we've added in 0 hours. We don't have a default just yet, but I can change that to 12. And automatically, every time I have a waitlist, the waitlist has a time limit of 12 hours, which means that if I sign up for an event and I'm on the waitlist and I get notified that a spot's become available and I can go ahead and register for the event, I then get 12 hours from the point that I receive my notification email to go ahead and register for that event before my registration is expired. Now, administrators can certainly resend that notification repeatedly until someone actually signs up. But in this case, we give them 12 hours, which is a good chunk of time if they, work during the day or maybe can't quite get to a computer. And then finally, how that waitlist is being processed. If you want to process all of your waitlists automatically, meaning as soon as a registration spot opens up, the first person added to the waitlist gets notified and that clock starts right away. Or if you prefer to be a little more hands-on and you prefer to process that waitlist manually, maybe you have a handful of people that you would like to notify ahead of others, it's entirely up to you. But if you add in those waitlist hours and you set the list to process automatically, you're done for the year. You don't have to worry about that at all. You can certainly go back in and check on things, make sure that folks are getting notified when they need to, but all of that is going to process automatically without you needing to touch it at all. And then the last thing that I wanted to point out would be our non-member and our guest settings. So this is where you determine what information you're collecting from non-members that are signing up for events or from guests that are being brought to events by other existing members. All of these fields will appear with each and every event that you create. And you can select an option for each field and for each registrant type. A non-member is someone who is signing up for an event on their own and is not a member of your organization. A guest is someone who is being brought by another member, so that the guest would also be a non-member. Now, with each of those, we can ask and show and require all of the fields that you see here. And every single field that gets filled in gets plopped right into that non-member record in your non-member database. So keep in mind, going forward this year, are you looking to beef up your contact list? Are you looking to maybe start reaching out to more of your non-members to increase your membership numbers? These are fields that you can pay attention to, especially if you host a lot of events and especially if you tend to get a lot of non-members or guests showing up to those events. Definitely pay attention to the contact information that you're collecting. If you are email based, if you send a lot of emails, have a lot of newsletters, you definitely want to show and require an email address for every single event that you have. Typically, it's not something, personally, I don't ever feel like I don't want to register for an event online if they ask for my email address. I assume that they probably need it because they want to send me some sort of confirmation. So it's not something that people tend to be leery of, especially with a lot of events moving online in general. So don't be afraid to go ahead and ask for that email address. And I'm 2 minutes over. And that's probably because I had Zoom trouble, but I thank everyone for being so patient. Devin, how are we doing on questions?
We have a lot. We have a lot of great suggestions that we'll have to kind of take note of and throw over to our ideas peoples. We got a few questions that we can go over. Someone did ask if they can see the login prompt for the event details again. So when you had an event that was set up where only members can see the details.
Sure. So we'll go right back into our calendar. And again, I'm not logged in and I'll scroll down and I have my details for members only meeting. And so my prompt is the page requested is available to logged in members or members only, and it asks you to log in.
All right. And then I had someone having trouble finding the copy button. Can you show me in the event manager where that clipboard copy button is?
Yes. So we'll pop right into our event calendar and I'll pop into the events manager. And of course, I can get there through the control panel as well. Go ahead and select search. And right next to our edit icon, we have our clipboard icon.
All right. And then we had several questions about like the difference between, I think we touched on this a few times, but sometimes it's a hard thing to grasp. The difference between like multiple copying an event versus using repeating events.
Yes.
That's just it's a fundamental difference. So if you are having multiple events where you need to have people register for each individual one, then you would have to copy events. If you're having one large event where if you sign up once, then you are automatically signed up for all of the dates, that would be a repeating date event. Someone said they wanted to copy without going into the edit manager. There's not a way to copy events without going to the event manager. That's the only screen where you can make copies of an event. And then we had someone ask about how to add a graphic to an event, so like a flyer or images to the description of the event. So if we can show the formatted description.
Sure. So when we are looking at any event, within our basic information, one of the checkboxes that we can check off, which is usually always included, is your formatted description. And with the formatted description, I'll go ahead and select that edit icon. You're going to be using what we call our advanced content editor. And this is something that you'll probably see in other places across your site. You certainly can use it to create custom pages as well. And this is where you would use all of these tools available. Most of them are self-explanatory to insert photos and images from your photo library and your web graphics library. So any images that you've uploaded to your site, you can go ahead and include those as well. You can add links, both external links and links to other content on your website. And you can also insert a handful of other things. You can embed media and you can add styles. So you can really create a very nice formatted description, that mimics a really nice event site that you might see. And it takes a little bit of time. And it's something that if you have all of those little details down pat, you can spend more time on the pretty things and the formatted descriptions and things like that.
We had some people ask about the ideal image size. There's not like one size fits all, like perfect ratio of an image, but if you're wanting to list like a flyer, as far as like image resolution goes, I always tell people like the rule of thumb is just kind of like maybe 1400-ish pixels wide. And then however tall the image is when you do it that way should be about right for putting like a picture in an event image. If you want something a little bit larger, a little bit smaller, it should still show up fine. Anything smaller than like 500 pixels is going to look a little bit small on the screen. And then if you force it to be larger and it's smaller than that, it might get a little warped. Someone also asked, how do they find other tutorials on managing the calendar? Those are all of our webinars and all of our tutorials are on our YouTube channel. And if you just go to like clubexpress.com on YouTube, if that's what you search with the dot spelled out, DOT, you'll find our channel. And within our channel, you can actually search, you can just type in events or calendar, and it should show you all of our videos relating to our event calendar. Yeah, I've seen a few more suggestions for things like event contacts. I do want to take a brief second, just say, if you're sending emails to our ideas email, we do read all of those. I really, really promise that we do. We don't always read them super timely, but we make sure that we read every single email that comes through, within a week or two. And, we don't always get the chance to reply to all of them, but that's actually where we pull all of our improvements from. So we have like a big long list of improvements, and we use the things that we get in our ideas email to come up with what we need to improve next, depending on, how many different people request certain things. So, when a bunch of people get together and say, hey, we need this calendar improvement, that's where we get our ideas for what we need to work on next, is how many people are asking for certain things. So, please use that ideas email, even though sometimes it feels like you're shouting into the darkness. We are hearing you, I promise.
And a lot of your ideas are really, really good ones. And so even going through the chat, Devin and I very much enjoy seeing them. Some of them are just little ideas that we don't always think of because we're not doing your job. So we very, very much encourage you to send any ideas and suggestions that you have to ideas@clubexpress.com.
Yeah, definitely. Someone did ask, it looks like our chat's slowing down just a little bit. Someone did ask, when tracking attendance, is there an email notification about attendance? There's not an email notification about attendance at the moment. That's something we might add to our list, but at the moment, no, there's just the email registration confirmation and the reminders, but there's not one for attendance. It's just the reports and the admin controls for tracking attendance.
I'll pop into our system emails. And the best way to find all of the event-related emails is when you're in the communications tab and you click on system emails. I like to just hit Control F in my browser and type in event. And you'll see that it highlights quite a few. And we can see in my browser that all of the major ones are down below here. And I can scroll down and find every single event system email that I might include. And a great tip, of course, is to always look through those and make any changes that you might want to make.
Yeah. Two last questions before we wrap it, because we're going a little bit over time today, but is there an event end date? Yes. When you're editing your basic info, there is an option to enter an event end date. So if you have an event that runs for, 3 or 4 days, you can actually have it span across multiple days. And especially if you're doing like a repeating date event where, you have an event that takes place every Monday for 5 weeks, you can set your time frame to be, it starts maybe on the 11th, but it ends on the 30th, or 2 months later. But then you have your repeating dates take place on individual days within there. That's how you would want to set that up. And then we had someone ask, can volunteer opportunities be added to events? Volunteer opportunities using the volunteering module. Yes. Those of you who are with our villages and you have the services module, you can enable it so that people can request transport to a certain event. But there's not an option to volunteer to transport people within an event. But if you're using the volunteer module, you can, when you're configuring the volunteering opportunity, you can actually tell it to link to an event in those configurations. And once you link it to an event from that volunteering opportunity configuration, once you go back to that event, you'll notice there will be an extra button that says volunteer. I can't remember if that button automatically disappears if all the slots are full, but that's something we could test. All right. I think we are probably a little bit distant over time, Sam, if you want to.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in our next webinar. Bye-bye.